Hey everyone, Tactics here with my updated rankings of healers in both Raids and Mythic Plus for Shadowlands release. This will cover all of the changes that have happened between now and my last video, providing a more accurate picture of how the different healer specs are looking. If you're interested in checking out my updated tank video, you can find it on my channel or linked in the description below. As always, I did want to say that these rankings are going to be based on how the specs are performing in Mythic Raids as well as high Mythic Plus keys, so around plus 20s and up. If you're someone who's only aiming to complete ahead of the curve or just get your Keystone Master achievement, every single healer on this list is more than capable of doing that, so my recommendation is to play the spec that you enjoy the most. With that out of the way, make sure you guys like and subscribe if you enjoy this video, and let's start with looking at how the different healer specs are looking in the first raid, Castle Nathria. Starting in the B tier, we have our 3 pure throughput healers with Resto Druids, Mistweavers, and Holy Priests. Resto Druids, while great in Mythic Plus, don't actually bring too much to a raid team. Their fantastic dungeon utility doesn't transfer well into raiding content, though they do bring Innervate and gain Stampeding Roar, which are both useful but can be brought by a much more wanted raid spec in Boomkins. In terms of cooldowns, Ironbark is an okay single target DR, though the cooldown was increased in Shadowlands, which definitely hurts a bit. Tranquility is a similarly okay raid cooldown, as it must be channeled for 8 seconds and does its healing over time, which can be both a good or bad thing depending on the fight damage layout. It can be put down to a 2-minute cooldown via a talent, which can allow for it to line up better with certain boss mechanics, but in general it's a bit lacking compared to other throughput cooldowns. Where Resto Druids really shine is in heavy sustained raid damage scenarios, where they're able to blanket hots on the entire raid, especially with Incarnation, though they can struggle if this damage comes in bursts. Overall, Resto Druids are just kind of okay across the board, with okay utility and cooldowns, but they don't really bring anything exceptionally noteworthy to a raid group. Next up, we've got Mistweavers, who have some more defined strengths and weaknesses. For strengths, Mistweavers bring the best single target healing and are completely unreliant on cooldowns in order to put out their strong single target throughput. The downsides, well, they don't really have any good cooldowns to use if they wanted to, with Life Cocoon being an okay absorb shield but only really being useful to soak otherwise lethal damage, and Revival being little more than a glorified Mass Dispel. The new Invoke Yulon is looking to be quite nice, but struggles when not stacked. This puts them in a spot of being solid tank healers, but if you need a little boost in heavy raid damage areas, they tend to fall behind. They are also extremely lacking in terms of utility, only really providing a move speed increase and snare removal in Tiger's Lust, as well as Mystic Touch, both of which can be brought by either Windwalkers or Brewmasters, diminishing the value for Mistweavers a bit. In general, if you need more single target healing, Mistweavers are definitely the way to go, but they lack good raid cooldowns and their utility is mediocre and can be brought by other monk specs. To finish off the B tier, we have our third and final pure throughput healer in Holy Priests. Whereas Mistweavers lacked on the raid cooldown front, Holy Priests have access to multiple, making them an ideal choice for covering large bursts of raid damage. On top of their large healing cooldowns, Holy Priest also has access to some powerful shorter cooldown healing via their Holy Words, though this can make them weaker in sustained damage scenarios, as well as in spread damage scenarios, as things like Sanctify have a short 10-yard AoE heal. They do bring some decent utility in Mass Dispel, Power Infusion, Leap of Faith, and Fortitude. However, like our previous 2 healers, this can be brought by other priest specs in Shadow and Discipline, both of which are more sought after for raid content. Like Mistweavers, they lack any sort of damage reduction, which is one of the reasons Disc tends to be more beneficial, but if covering bursts of damage is what you need, Holy Priests are a fantastic option. Moving on to our A tier healer, we have Holy Paladins. While Paladins definitely provide the lowest throughput out of any healer currently, they make up for it with some amazing cooldowns and utility. Starting with their utility, Devotion Aura has been reworked into a 3% raid-wide damage reduction, so every group will want at least one Paladin in their raid, but this could also be brought by Prot or Ret. They also have the standard array of powerful Paladin utility, with an immunity and Blessing of Protection, a slow and snare removal and Blessing of Freedom, and a DR and Blessing of Sacrifice. Their most powerful tool by far is Aura Mastery, providing a raid-wide 15% DR, which will be very useful in Mythic progression. In terms of their healing output, they are fantastic at triage and tank healing, though they can struggle in high damage situations when they don't have access to wings, especially if the raid is spread. Basically, their lower overall healing throughput can be overcome by the strength of aura mastery, as well as their fantastic utility and spot healing ability, giving them the lone spot in the A tier. From there, we have our S tier healers, where we'll start with Restoration Shamans. They have been an extremely strong raid healer for a long time, thanks to the strength of their cooldowns and utility, which hasn't changed in Shadowlands. Spirit Link remains a game changer, and Healing Tide Totem provides solid throughput but doesn't tie you down to a location like Holy Priest or Resto Druid, freeing you up to add to the healing and move as needed. They also have access to Wind Rush Totem, Tremor Totem, and Capacitor Totem, which all tend to be useful for at least some fights, as well as Reincarnate and the Niche Ancestral Protection Totem for a pseudo battle res. On top of this, Mana Tide Totem has made a return in Shadowlands, which is a nice little boost to healers' regen on progression fights, but beware it has a fairly small radius. Their throughput is also absolutely fantastic when the raid is stacked, though they can struggle if people move out of the chain heal bounce range. They also lack an individual DR, but this is more than made up for with their other strong tools. To conclude the S tier, we have by far the most difficult healer to master in Disciplined Priests. The reason they are complicated is because they require a good knowledge of the damage patterns of a fight in order for you to set up your healing for when you need it, as they are a proactive healer and really struggle in reactive emergency healing situations. This means that the difference between a good and bad Disc Priest is very distinct, so just because they're at the top of this list doesn't mean you should pick one up and assume it'll be just as good as your old main. If you are able to master Disc, however, they provide solid, short cooldown raid-wide burst healing, and can also pump out solid, sustained single target healing, though not as strong as Mistweavers in that regard. They do have some extremely powerful tools at their disposal as well, with a 25% AoE DR in Power Word Barrier, and a 40% single target DR in Pain Suppression, as well as plenty of absorbs, especially with the return of Spirit Shell, which allows them to stop damage before it even reaches your health pool. They also come with all the same utility spells as Holy Priests, as they are shared between all priest specs. Overall, while complicated and hard to master, having a good Disc Priest is absolutely invaluable to a raid group, which is why they're up here in the S tier. Moving on, let's take a look at healers in Mythic Plus, specifically for high Mythic Plus keys, starting with the bottom spec in Holy Priests. As we've discussed, throughput is not Holy Priest's problem. Rather, it's a combination of low mobility, squishiness, mediocre damage, and a lack of an external DR. They're in a better spot than they were in BFA, with the addition of Mind Soothe and Power Infusion, Circle of Healing being baseline, as well as changes to both Bursting and Grievous, where the former can now be cleansed by Mass Dispel, and the latter can have its stacks removed by Direct Healing, but they are definitely still behind the rest of the competition, which leaves them in the C tier. From there, we move on to our B tier healers, starting with Mistweaver Monks. Their strong single target throughput without use of cooldowns is very good in Mythic Plus, especially early on in the expansion when tanks have less self-sustain. While they don't have a DR just like Holy Priest, Life Cocoon is an okay, albeit weaker alternative. Unlike Holy Priest, they are also exceptionally mobile and tanky, making them feel much safer to play in general. They are a little lacking on the utility front, but what they do have is extremely powerful, with Ring of Peace aiding in kiting, as well as being strong against affixes like Sanguine and the new Spiteful, and Mystic Touch buffing your allies' physical damage. Like Holy Priest, they also benefit from the Grievous and Bursting changes, as they have plenty of direct heals to remove Grievous, and it gives them the option to use Revival to clear a big Bursting on your party. If we look at their biggest weaknesses, they are definitely one of, if not the lowest damage healer, which isn't the biggest deal, but definitely means more in Mythic Plus than it does in raids. On top of this, it can be quite easy for Mistweavers to run out of mana if you aren't careful, though this is partially mitigated by the Prideful seasonal affix. Overall, Monk's solid single target throughput is definitely carrying them in Shadowlands Season 1, giving them a spot in the B tier. Alongside Mistweavers, we have Holy Paladins. Unlike the sustained single target healing provided by monks, paladins are much better at burst triage healing with access to spells like Word of Glory and Light of the Martyr, though they still struggle with heavy sustained group damage without a cooldown like Wings available, which will be quite common thanks to the Prideful seasonal affix. They're also able to pump out some solid damage, though this can be a bit pricey mana-wise even after the recent mana cost reduction to Crusader Strike. Their damage also requires them to be in melee, and while they are quite tanky, they do lack mobility to get out of bad situations. On the utility front, it transfers quite nicely between raids and Mythic Plus for Paladins, with slow and snare removal, immunities, and DRs being powerful in all forms of content, not to mention the party-wide DR and Devotion Aura. They can also feel a little lacking outside of their cooldown windows, at least at lower gear levels, but that should get better down the line as stat levels rise, but for now they are solidly in the B tier. With that, we move on to the A tier, where we find Resto Shamans. Shamans continue to provide fantastic throughput in dungeons, especially when stacked, making them a solid defensive choice. Their AoE damage can be a bit lacking, but in single targeting cleave scenarios they can pump out some solid damage, albeit at the expense of healing throughput. Like Paladins, their utility transfers from Raid to Mythic Plus well, with some additional benefit in Purge, and also being the only healer with access to an Interrupt and Bloodlust, which is much more important with the nerf to drums. It definitely hurts not having an external DR, but this can be made up for with the raw strength of Shaman's throughput, as well as the AoE 10% DR and health redistribution effect of Spirit Link, which can enable some very large pulls. Joining Shamans in the A tier, we have the previous kings of Mythic Plus and Resto Druids. While they have definitely been knocked down a peg with repeated nerfs to their damage, top covenant, and legendary, they still remain one of the top healers in Mythic Plus thanks to their strong kit. While their utility is certainly a bit lacking in raids, it really does shine in Mythic Plus, with mob control like Ursul's Vortex and Typhoon, an Enraged Dispel, some more niche spells in Mass Entanglement and Cyclone, a move speed increase in Stampeding Roar, and of course being the only healer with a battle res. In addition to this insane amount of utility, Resto Druid Mastery is extremely powerful in 5-man content, allowing them to stack up pots on their group to do a ton of healing, no cooldowns needed. They also have access to a short cooldown external DR for the tank if needed, something Shamans lack. Damage-wise, they remain solid despite nerfs, with the ability to Sunfire from a safe distance and potentially Chicken Weave with Convoke to put out solid burst damage. In general, Resto Druids are still all around great in dungeons thanks to their mastery and plethora of utility, handily putting them in the A tier. And that means that on top of Mythic Plus, we again see Disciplined Priests. Disc Priests are by far the highest damage healer, and they're able to do so without giving up much if any of their healing thanks to Atonement. They still have poor mobility and feel squishy like any priest, but being in range with access to multiple DRs and absorb shields helps to mitigate that problem. While they remain a complex spec to play correctly, pre-planning pulls so you know when large damage spikes are coming and are able to prepare for them really helps discs shine, making them fantastic for pre-made groups but possibly struggle in pugs where the need for emergency healing can be difficult for them to deal with. On top of this, similar to Holy Priest, they benefit greatly from the bursting and grievous changes which previously were difficult for them to deal with. Overall, Disc provides great group burst healing, strong DRs, high damage, and decent utility, which help to put them in the S tier not only for raids, but for Mythic Plus as well. But that is it for my Shadowlands release healer rankings for raids and Mythic Plus. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure you like and subscribe for more Warcraft content. If you're looking for similar rankings of tanks, feel free to check out that video on my channel or linked in the description, and keep an eye out for my DPS rankings video coming out in the next couple days. I'll also be putting out quick guides for the new Shadowlands dungeons before release, so watch out for those. To keep up to date with me, you can follow me on Twitter, or you can check me out on Twitch, both at Tactics. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.